Zane stepped off the transport shuttle and stretched his arms. The space station, Orion 12, was always busy. Aliens of all shapes and sizes moved around, talking in different languages, some floating, some crawling, and some walking like humans. He had lived here for 6 months now and had gotten used to the strange sights. But today was different. Today, he was getting a new roommate. Zane sighed as he carried his bag towards his shared living quarters. His last roommate, a giant reptilian alien, had moved out without a word. Hopefully, this new one wouldn't be as messy. He reached his door, placed his palm on the scanner, and walked in. The room was still the same. 2 beds, a small kitchen, and a table in the middle. But now, there were 2 bags near the other bed. His new roommate was already here. Then he saw her. She was standing near the window, looking out into space. She was tall, at least a head taller than Zane, with smooth blue-green skin that had a faint glow. Her hair wasn't really hair. It was made of soft, moving tendrils, glowing slightly at the tips. She turned when she heard him enter, her bright silver eyes studying him carefully. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she gave a polite nod. "You're Zane, correct?" Her voice was calm, smooth, but had a slight echo, like 2 voices speaking at once. Zane nodded. "Yeah. And you?" "I am Nara," she said. "I will be your roommate from now on." Zane put his bag down and glanced at her belongings. She had brought some strange devices, a few clothes, and a small cube that floated slightly above the table. Definitely not human tech. "Where are you from?" Zane asked, trying to start a conversation. Nara tilted her head. "Far from here. My people do not visit human stations often." Zane raised an eyebrow. That explained why she looked so different from most aliens he had seen. He wanted to ask more, but she didn't seem like the talkative type. "All right. Well, welcome, I guess." He moved to his side of the room and started unpacking. For the next few hours, they mostly ignored each other. Nara spent her time adjusting her belongings, sometimes touching the floating cube, which responded with soft blue lights. Zane focused on setting up his own stuff, making sure to keep his important gear hidden. He had weapons, armor, and some high-tech gadgets, things he didn't want others to see. On Orion 12, civilians weren't supposed to have advanced military gear, and while Zane wasn't exactly breaking the rules, he didn't want unnecessary attention. After finishing, he finally decided to check on Nara. She was sitting at the table, staring at the floating cube. "Hey, do you eat normal food?" he asked. Nara looked up. "Normal." Zane shrugged. "I mean, human food. Or do you eat something else?" She thought for a moment before answering. "I can eat human food, yes, but I prefer energy-based nutrients." Zane frowned. "Energy-based, like light?" Nara nodded. "Yes, my body absorbs certain wavelengths." Zane blinked. "That's different." She gave a small smile, the first bit of emotion he had seen from her. "To me, your food is different." Zane laughed. "Fair enough." Despite her strange nature, she didn't seem unfriendly. Maybe this arrangement wouldn't be so bad after all. That night, Zane lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Orion 12 was always noisy, with ships arriving and leaving every hour, but he had gotten used to it. His thoughts drifted to his gear. He had spent years training, fighting, surviving. Even though he lived on a peaceful space station now, he always kept his weapons close. Humans had a reputation in the galaxy. They were not the strongest, fastest, or smartest species, but they were tough, resilient. They never gave up. Most aliens underestimated humans, but Zane knew that when the time came, humans always adapted. As he closed his eyes, he heard a soft beep from Nara's side of the room. He turned his head slightly. Nara was awake, staring at his storage locker. Zane frowned. He had locked it, but somehow, the door was slightly open, and inside, his gear was visible. Nara's silver eyes widened as she looked at the contents. She was shocked. But the strangest thing, she wasn't hiding it. Zane's eyes narrowed as he sat up in bed. His locker was supposed to be locked, but now it was slightly open. Inside, his weapons, armor, and advanced gear were visible, glowing faintly under the dim light of the room. And Nara was staring at them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Zane's training kicked in. His mind raced with possibilities. Had she broken into his locker? Was she a spy? Was she a threat? He swung his legs over the bed, planting his feet on the cold metal floor. "What are you doing?" His voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. Nara blinked, as if realizing she had been caught. Instead of looking guilty, she looked curious. Her silver eyes flickered to Zane, then back to the gear. "No, it doesn't," he admitted, "and you're not supposed to see it." Nara's glowing tendrils shifted slightly, a sign of deep thought. "This technology, it is human, but it is more advanced than what I have seen before. And these weapons," she gestured towards a sleek, black energy rifle. "This is not standard security equipment." Zane sighed. "You're right. It's not." He walked over and shut the locker door, locking it properly this time. He could lie, but something told him that Nara wasn't the type to believe easy answers. Instead, he folded his arms and looked at her directly. "How did you open it?" Nara tilted her head. "It was not locked." Zane frowned. "That's impossible. I always lock it." Nara seemed amused. "Perhaps you made a mistake." Zane didn't like that. He was careful about his gear. He had locked that door. He was sure of it. But arguing wouldn't change the fact that Nara had seen everything. Zane sat down at the table, rubbing his face. "All right. You saw my gear. Now what?" Nara didn't sit. She studied him, like she was trying to figure something out. Finally, she spoke. "You are not a simple worker, are you?" Zane smirked. "No, I'm not." "Then what are you?" He thought for a moment. He wasn't going to tell her everything. Not yet. "I was a soldier," he said finally. "Special forces. But I left that life behind." Nara's expression didn't change, but Zane noticed how her tendrils shifted again. "You are a warrior," she said, more to herself than to him. Zane chuckled. "Not anymore. Now, I just fix machines." Nara didn't look convinced. A warrior does not stop being a warrior just because they change their surroundings. Zane shrugged. "Maybe. But I didn't come here to fight. I came here for peace." Nara was silent for a moment. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small curve of her lips. But it was there. "Humans are strange," she said finally. Zane raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "You are dangerous," Nara said. "Yet you pretend you are not." Zane laughed. "I'm not pretending. I really don't want trouble." Nara's silver eyes gleamed. "But trouble may find you anyway." Zane sighed. "Yeah, that happens a lot." For the next few days, things changed between them. Before, Nara had been polite but distant. Now she was curious. She started asking questions about human weapons, tactics, and technology. She wanted to understand how humans thought, how they fought, and why they had advanced so quickly compared to other species. Zane didn't answer all her questions, but he didn't completely ignore her either. One evening, as he cleaned one of his energy blades, Nara sat across from him, watching carefully. "May I see it?" she asked. Zane hesitated, then handed it over. "Careful. It's sharp." Nara examined the blade. "This is impressive. It is light, but strong. The energy core is well placed." Zane smirked. "You know weapons." Nara nodded. "My people do not use them, but we study them. We believe knowledge is the greatest defense." Zane leaned back. "So, you don't fight?" Nara hesitated. "Not in the way humans do. We avoid war." We solve problems through strategy, not battle. Zane tapped his fingers on the table. That's nice, but sometimes talking doesn't work. Nera's silver eyes met his. That is why humans are feared. Zane raised an eyebrow. Feared. Nera nodded. Many species do not understand you. They see humans as unpredictable, too adaptable, too dangerous. Zane chuckled. We're not that bad. Nera smiled slightly. Perhaps, but your kind survives where others would perish. That is impressive. Zane wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. That night, as Zane lay in bed, he thought about what Nera had said. Were humans really feared? He knew humans had a reputation for survival and adaptability, but he never thought of it as something that scared other species. But maybe Nera was right. Humans did survive, no matter what. And as much as he wanted a peaceful life, he had a feeling that trouble was coming. Because Nera wasn't the only one interested in his gear. Someone else had noticed. And soon, Zane would have to fight again. Zane woke up to the sound of soft beeping. His eyes opened instantly, his instincts already alert. He reached under his pillow, fingers brushing against the cold metal of a compact energy pistol. Then he realized where he was. Orion 12. His room. The beeping wasn't an alarm. It was coming from Nera's side of the room. Zane sighed and sat up. Across the room, Nera was standing near the window, her glowing tendrils shifting slowly as she focused on a small floating device in front of her. It was spinning, flashing symbols he didn't recognize. You always wake up this early? Zane asked, stretching his arms. Nera glanced at him. I do not require as much rest as humans. Zane rubbed his eyes. Lucky you. For the past few days, things had changed between them. Since she saw his gear, Nera had been more curious. She asked him questions about human warfare, weapons, and survival tactics. Zane had answered some but avoided revealing too much. Now, as she deactivated the floating device, she turned to him with an expectant look. I have a request, she said. Zane sighed. Should I be worried? Nera tilted her head. I would like to test your abilities. Zane frowned. Test. A friendly match. No weapons. Only physical combat. Zane blinked. You want to fight me? Because humans are an enigma, Nera said, her silver eyes studying him closely. Your kind has survived against stronger, faster, and more advanced species. I wish to understand. Why? Zane chuckled. You think a sparring match will give you answers? Nera's lips curled slightly. Perhaps. Zane thought about it. He hadn't trained properly in a long time. He spent his days working on machines, keeping his skills hidden. Maybe this was a good chance to shake off the rust. He grinned. All right. Let's do it. They moved to an empty training hall inside the space station. It was mostly used for security drills, so it had open space and padded floors. Zane rolled his shoulders. Rules. No weapons. No serious injuries, Nera said. First to pin the other wins. Zane smirked. Sounds fair. Nera stepped into position, her glowing tendrils moving slightly, as if reacting to her focus. Zane raised his fists. Let's see what you've got. The moment the fight began, Nera moved fast. Zane barely had time to react as she slid forward, her movements fluid and graceful. She struck quickly, aiming for his shoulder. Zane dodged, stepping back just in time. She's fast. Faster than most humans he had fought before. But Zane wasn't slow either. He countered with a quick jab, but Nera twisted her body unnaturally, dodging the strike with ease. She retaliated with a low sweep, aiming for his legs. Zane jumped back, avoiding the attack. Not bad, he said. Nera's silver eyes gleamed. You are holding back. Zane grinned. Maybe. Nera didn't hesitate. She rushed forward again, her movements almost unpredictable. Her speed and flexibility made her difficult to hit. She dodged most of his attacks and kept the pressure on. But Zane wasn't just fast, he was experienced. He analyzed her movements, looking for patterns. She relied on speed and agility, avoiding direct confrontation. But she had a weakness. She was too focused on dodging rather than attacking. Zane waited for the right moment. When Nara lunged again, he didn't dodge. Instead, he moved forward, catching her by surprise. Before she could react, he grabbed her arm and twisted, using her momentum against her. Nara's eyes widened as Zane spun her around and pinned her to the ground. "Gotcha," Zane said, smirking. For a moment, Nara was silent. Then she laughed softly. "Impressive," she admitted. "You adapted quickly." Zane stood up and offered her a hand. She took it, standing gracefully. "You're not bad yourself," he said, "but you rely too much on dodging." Nara nodded. "I see that now. You anticipated my movements." Zane crossed his arms. "That's the thing about humans. We learn fast." Nara studied him for a moment. "Perhaps that is why your kind is feared." Zane raised an eyebrow. "You keep saying that. Feared by who?" Nara hesitated. "Many species respect humans, but some see your adaptability as a threat." Zane sighed. "Great, so we're scary now." Nara smiled slightly. "Not scary, just unpredictable." Zane chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." As they walked back to their quarters, Nara was deep in thought. "You are different from what I expected," she admitted. Zane glanced at her. "Yeah, what did you expect?" "A simple engineer, a man running from his past. But now I see. You are much more." Zane smirked. "Took you long enough." Nara shook her head. "I still have more to learn about humans." Zane laughed. "Stick around. We'll keep surprising you." But deep down, he knew one thing for sure. Nara wasn't the only one watching him. Because in the shadows of Oran 12, something was coming. And soon, Zane's past would catch up with him. When Zane returned to Nara, she had already subdued the first attacker. "They are skilled," she said, studying them. "Not common criminals." Zane nodded. They were here for something important. His eyes flicked to the device still attached to the data terminal. He walked over and checked the screen. The download had stopped at 83% before they interrupted it. Nara peered over his shoulder. What were they trying to steal? Zane's face darkened as he read the file name. It wasn't just station security data. It was classified human military technology. Zane clenched his fists. This wasn't a simple break-in. His voice was quiet but full of tension. Someone wants human tech, and they're willing to fight for it. Nara's silver eyes met his. "Then this is only the beginning." Zane sighed. "Yeah, and I hate beginnings." Zane and Nara stood in the dimly lit maintenance bay, staring at the unconscious intruders. The tension in the air was heavy. The half-completed data transfer on the terminal screen made one thing clear. Someone wanted human military secrets. Zane clenched his fists. This wasn't random. This was planned. Nara knelt beside one of the intruders, her silver eyes studying them carefully. She reached out and pulled back the hood. Zane leaned in, frowning. The intruder was not human. They had pale blue skin, ridges along their forehead, and small cybernetic implants near their temples. Nara's voice was calm but serious. "They are Vakari." Zane exhaled. "Figures." The Vakari were known for their espionage and advanced technology. They rarely got into direct fights, preferring to work from the shadows. If they were here, it meant something big was happening. Before Zane could say anything else, the station's security alarms blared to life. "Alert. Unauthorized activity detected. Security forces are on their way." Zane and Nara exchanged glances. "We need to go," Nara said. Zane sighed. "Yeah. Let's move before they decide we're the bad guys." They slipped out of Maintenance Sector 7 before the security team arrived. As they walked through the quieter hallways, Zane's mind raced. Someone sent those intruders. Someone knew about him. And now, whoever they were, they knew that he was in the way. Nera finally broke the silence. "You seem troubled." Zane smirked slightly. "Oh, just another day with spies breaking into my workplace." Nera's expression didn't change. "You are thinking about the bigger picture." Zane sighed. "Yeah, this wasn't some random data theft. It was targeted. They knew what they were looking for." Nera nodded. "And they will try again." Zane already knew that. He had dealt with enough covert missions in the past to recognize a long-term operation when he saw one. The first attempt had failed. But the next time, they wouldn't send just 2 spies. Back in their quarters, Zane grabbed his bag from under his bed and started checking his gear. Nera watched him, her expression unreadable. "You are preparing for war." Zane chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "I'm preparing to stay alive." He pulled out a small data pad and typed a quick message. Then he encrypted it and sent it through a secure channel. "Who are you contacting?" Nera asked. Zane didn't look up. "An old friend." She studied him for a moment. "Do you trust them?" Zane smirked. "Not at all. But they owe me a favor." He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "If the Vakari are after human tech, they're not working alone. Someone hired them." Nera nodded. "Then we must find out who." Zane tapped his fingers against the table. "Yeah, and we need to do it fast." The message. The response to Zane's message came 3 hours later. It was short but clear. "Meet me at Dock 12. Midnight. Come alone." Zane read it twice. Then he turned to Nera. "I need to go." Nera stood. "Then I am coming with you." Zane shook his head. "They said to come alone." Nera crossed her arms. "And do you trust them?" Zane sighed. "No." Nera tilted her head slightly. "Then I am coming with you." Zane smirked. "You don't take orders well, do you?" Nera's silver eyes glowed slightly. "No." Zane laughed softly. "All right, fine. But stay hidden." Nera nodded. "Understood." The meeting. Zane arrived at Dock 12 just before midnight. The massive hangar was quiet, the only sound coming from distant machinery. A single figure stood near a small cargo ship, leaning against the hull. Zane approached cautiously. The figure turned, revealing a scared human face. The man had short, dark hair and a cybernetic implant along his jaw. His sharp eyes studied Zane with mild amusement. Well, Zane is still alive." Zane smirked. Surprised, the man shrugged. "A little. You tend to make enemies faster than friends." Zane crossed his arms. "Cut to the chase, Red. What do you know?" Red sighed. "You always were impatient." He glanced around before lowering his voice. "The Vakari aren't working alone. Someone big hired them." Zane narrowed his eyes. "Who?" Red hesitated. "I don't know yet, but whoever it is, they're moving fast. They're collecting data on human military advances, ships, weapons, AI systems." Zane frowned. "Why?" Red shook his head. "No idea. But I can tell you this. Whatever they're planning, it's bad." Zane exhaled. "Great. Any good news?" Red smirked. "Yeah. You're not dead yet." Zane chuckled. "Comforting." Before they could continue, a sharp click echoed in the air. Zane's instincts flared. A sniper rifle had just been armed. "Move," Zane shouted. A red laser sight appeared on Red's chest. He barely had time to react before a silent shot fired. Red dodged, but the bullet grazed his shoulder, sending him stumbling. Zane drew his pistol and fired at the sniper's position, but whoever it was had already vanished into the darkness. Nera appeared from the shadows, her silver eyes scanning the area. "They are escaping." Zane cursed. "Yeah, I figured." Red clutched his bleeding shoulder. "Told you, Zane. Someone doesn't want you asking questions. Zane holstered his weapon, his jaw tightening. Too bad for them. He turned to Nara. Looks like we just made some powerful enemies. Nara nodded. Then we must prepare for what comes next. Zane exhaled. Yeah, and something tells me it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Zane paced in his quarters, his mind racing. The meeting at Dock 12 had gone badly. Red was injured, and a sniper had tried to eliminate them. Someone didn't just want to steal human military secrets. They wanted to erase anyone who got in the way. Across the room, Nara stood silently, watching him. You are restless, she observed. Zane exhaled. Yeah, we're running out of time. Red's words echoed in his mind. Whoever they are, they're moving fast. The Vicari weren't acting alone. Someone powerful was behind them, and now that Zane had interfered, he had made himself a target. A soft beep came from the console on the wall. Zane and Nara exchanged glances before he pressed a button. Red's voice came through, rough but steady. You still alive? Zane smirked. Yeah. You? Red chuckled, but there was tension in his tone. Barely. Listen, I found something. But I can't send it over comms. Too risky. Meet me in sub-level 3, Storage Bay 42. Zane frowned. That area is off limits. Exactly, Red replied. Less chance of being overheard. But come fast. I don't think I have much time. The signal cut off. Zane clenched his fists. That didn't sound good. Nara nodded. It sounded like a warning. Zane grabbed his weapons. Let's move. A trap waiting to spring. Sub-level 3 was almost abandoned, a dark and quiet part of the station used for excess storage. The perfect place for a secret meeting. Zane and Nara moved silently through the long corridors, their senses on high alert. As they approached Storage Bay 42, Zane held up a hand, signaling Nara to stop. Something felt wrong. The doors to the storage bay were slightly open. No sound came from inside. Zane took a deep breath and stepped forward, pushing the doors open wider. The sight that greeted him made his stomach drop. Red was slumped against a metal crate, a bird mark on his chest. Zane rushed forward, kneeling beside him. Red. Hey, stay with me. Red coughed, his breathing shallow. His cybernetic implant flickered. They knew. Zane's jaw clenched. Who did this? Red's fingers weakly pressed a small data chip into Zane's palm. Everything you need to know. Don't let them win. Then his body went still. Zane felt anger boil inside him. Whoever was behind this had just made a big mistake. Before he could say anything, Nara suddenly turned her head toward the doorway. We are not alone. Zane tensed. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Then a deep voice spoke. We were hoping you'd come, Zane. A group of armored figures stepped into the room, blocking the exit. Their weapons were drawn, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. The leader took a step forward. Hand over the chip. Zane's grip on the data chip tightened. He wasn't about to surrender. He glanced at Nara, her silver eyes locked onto the enemy. Then, in a low voice, he said, We fight. The ambush. The armored figures opened fire. Zane dove behind cover, pulling Nara down with him. Energy blasts hit the crates, sending sparks flying. Zane returned fire, taking out one of the attackers with a precise shot. Nara moved fast, almost too fast for the eye to follow. She closed the distance between herself and an enemy, using a fluid motion to knock the weapon from their hands. The enemy swung at her, but she ducked, twisting behind them, and delivering a sharp strike to the back of their neck. They collapsed instantly. Zane smirked. Not bad. More enemies rushed in. Zane knew they couldn't hold this position forever. They needed a way out. His eyes darted to a nearby air vent. It was large enough for them to fit through. Nara, cover me. Nara nodded and launched herself at the remaining attackers. She was quick and precise, disarming one enemy while dodging another's attack. Meanwhile, Zane pried open the vent cover and climbed inside. Nara. Now. She delivered a final kick to an enemy's chest before flipping backward into the vent. Zane sealed the cover just as the enemies fired at them, the blasts missing by inches. That was close, Zane muttered as they crawled through the vent. Nara glanced at him. We survived. That is what matters. Zane exhaled. Yeah. But now, I want answers. The truth in the data. Back in their quarters, Zane inserted the data chip into his console. A holographic screen lit up, revealing classified information. Zane's eyes scanned the files. His expression darkened. The Valkyrie hadn't been working alone. They were hired by a powerful human faction, a rogue military group that believed humanity needed to control alien technology at any cost. And worse, they had plans to attack a major human colony, framing aliens for the destruction to start a war. Nara leaned in. This is madness. Zane clenched his fists. This is a setup. He understood now. They weren't just stealing tech. They were engineering a conflict. And now that he had this information, they would do anything to silence him. The station was no longer safe. Zane turned to Nara. We have to leave. Now. She nodded. Where will we go? Zane smirked. Somewhere they won't expect. But before they could move, the room's communication console beeped. A robotic voice spoke. Attention. All station personnel. Be advised. Zane Carter and Nara of Ixar are now considered fugitives. Report any sightings immediately. Zane froze. They just put a target on our backs. Nara's silver eyes locked onto his. Then we must outrun the hunters. Zane grabbed his gear. No, we don't run. He looked at the screen one last time. We fight. Zane tightened the straps on his tactical vest. His weapons were ready. His mind was clear. Across the room, Nara checked her energy blades. The silver glow reflected in her focused eyes. The station had turned against them. They were now fugitives, framed for crimes they didn't commit. The real enemy, the rogue human faction, was still out there, planning to start a war. Zane exhaled. No turning back now. Nara nodded. We end this. They had one chance. The main control center held the communications hub for the entire station. If they could broadcast the data Red had given them, they could expose the truth before the rogue faction erased all evidence. But security forces were already hunting them, and the Valkyrie spies wouldn't give up either. This would be a fight to the end. Breaking in, the hallways were crawling with guards. Zane and Nara moved like shadows, avoiding patrols when they could and eliminating threats when necessary. A guard stepped around a corner. Zane reacted fast. One precise punch to the throat, and the man collapsed silently. Nara leaped from the shadows, landing behind another guard, and knocking them unconscious with a sharp elbow strike. They dragged the bodies into a storage unit before continuing forward. The main control room was just ahead, but a group of 4 heavily armed guards stood in their way. Zane glanced at Nara. Loud or quiet? She tilted her head. Loud. Zane grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. The firefight. Zane stepped out first, guns blazing. 2 guards went down before they even knew what was happening. The other 2 returned fire, forcing him behind cover. Nara moved fast, dodging energy blasts as she closed the distance. Her blade sliced through armor, and in seconds, the last guard collapsed. Zane reloaded. We're running out of time. Nara nodded. Then we move now. They burst into the control center. Inside, several technicians turned in shock. A commander in a black uniform stood near the main console, his face twisting in anger when he saw Zane. You should have stayed hidden. Zane leveled his gun. And let you start a war. Not a chance. The commander smirked. You won't leave this room alive. He pressed a button on his wrist device. Alarms blared. Reinforcements were coming. Zane looked at Nera. "Cover me." She leaped forward, engaging the commander in close combat. Zane rushed to the main console. Inserting Red's data chip, the files began uploading. A voice crackled over the station's speakers. "Warning. Unauthorized transmission detected." Zane's heart pounded. He just needed a few more seconds. The final battle. The doors burst open. More guards poured in. Nera fought like a storm, her blades flashing. The commander tried to counter her attacks, but he was too slow. Zane ducked behind a console, returning fire. One enemy fell. Then another. But there were too many. A blast grazed his shoulder, burning his jacket. He gritted his teeth and fired back. The upload bar was at 80%. Then, a sharp blade pierced the commander's chest. Nera stepped back as he collapsed, his eyes filled with shock. Impossible. She turned to Zane. "Is it done?" Zane checked the screen. 95%. 96%. Then, an explosion rocked the room. A final backup team had arrived. He saw them aiming a rocket launcher at the console. "No." Zane lunged forward, grabbing a nearby rifle. He fired at the soldier with the launcher, just as they pulled the trigger. The rocket veered off course, hitting the ceiling instead. Fire and debris rained down. Zane turned back. The upload was complete. The truth was out. The entire station, the entire galactic network, now had proof of the rogue faction's plans. The war they wanted to start, stopped before it began. Escape. But they weren't safe yet. With the control room falling apart, Zane and Nera had to run. They dodged fire, leaped over debris, and made their way to the hangar bay. Zane spotted a small transport ship. "That's our ride." More enemies arrived, firing wildly. Nera flipped onto the ship's wing, deflecting shots with her blades. Zane got inside, powered up the engines, and took off just as explosions erupted behind them. The station shrank in the distance as they entered open space. Zane leaned back, breathing hard. "We made it." Nera sat across from him, watching the stars. For now. The aftermath. The transmission had spread. The rogue faction's leaders were exposed. The galaxy was in chaos, but at least a war had been prevented. Zane turned to Nera. "So, what now?" She studied him. "You are still a wanted man." Zane smirked. "Yeah, and so are you." Nera tilted her head. "Then we must keep moving." Zane chuckled. "You know, I was thinking the same thing." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the stars. Then Zane grinned, ready for the next adventure. Nera nodded. "Always." And with that, the ship jumped into hyperspace, disappearing into the unknown. The galaxy wasn't ready for them.